Good morning, everyone. My name's Lauren. I'm a TA for this class, and today I'm going to be teaching you about the Great Basin. One second. Okay, so beyond the wasteland myth. So many people think the Great Basin is just a wasteland, but today I'm going to teach you about the history of the Great Basin and how it was home for many people for thousands of years. The Great Basin is not empty. Its resources are subtle. They require timing, movement, and deep ecological knowledge. Productivity here does not look like large agricultural fields or dense cities. Rather, it looks like adaptation. For thousands of years, indigenous communities thrived in this region. So, to understand resilience, we must first move beyond the myth of the wasteland. This is not a failed landscape, it is a landscape that rewards ecological intelligence. Alrighty, next slide. The Great Basin is defined by basin and range topography. Long mountain ranges alternate with wide valleys, creating dramatic elevation shifts. These shifts produce microclimates. Higher elevations, like that, receive more precipitation and support pinon pine and juniper woodlands. Valley floors are drier and host different plant communities. The region is also endoheric system, meaning water does not drain to the ocean. Instead, it collects internally in seasonal lakes and sinks. Water availability fluctuates. Understanding this geography, is critical because survival depended on moving strategically between ecological zones, the land-structured lifeways. Alrighty, let's go over the different periods. First, we have the Paleo-Indian period. So when we say 10,000 years of adaptation, we are referring to multiple cultural phases shaped by environmental change. During the Paleo-Indian period, communities were highly mobile and relied heavily on hunting large game, including megafauna that are now extinct. The climate was cooler and wetter, and larger lakes were more common across the region. As climate conditions became warmer and drier, the Archaic period emerged. Communities shifted toward a broader substance base. Plant gathering intensified. Small game hunting increased. Grinding stones appeared more frequently, showing the importance of seed processing. Adaptation meant diversification. Later, we see the Numic expansion. This brought Numic-speaking peoples across the Great Basin. These communities refined mobility routes, kinship networks, and ecological specialization. What we see across these periods is not stagnation, but adjustment. 10,000 years of adaptation reflects cultural flexibility across generations. When we talk about architecture in the Great Basin, we are not referring to permanent buildings, but rather the true architecture. It was social. Kinship was organized through bilateral descent, meaning individuals traced family ties through mother and father lines. This created wide networks of relatives across regions. Marriage alliances were flexible and strengthened connections between groups, expanding access to territory and resources. Women played a central role in survival. Gathering and processing plants provided a stable calorie base. Grinding, drying, and preparing seeds required labor and deep ecological knowledge. Social structure expanded and contracted based on resource availability. In spring and summer, nuclear families often moved independently when resources were dispersed. In fall and winter, especially during pinon harvest season, larger bands gathered. The system was elastic. It stretched and contracted with the land. Next slide. Oh my goodness. Okay, there we go. The pinon nut, the calorie engine. The pinon nut functioned as a nutritional anchor in many parts of the Great Basin. Piñon nuts are high in fat and protein and can be stored for long periods. Harvest occurred in the fall when cones matured. Family used poles to knock cones from trees. Cones were roasted to release the nuts, which were dried and stored for winter. Harvest season also strengthened social bonds as larger groups gathered. In unpredictable environments, stored calories equal stability. The piñon nut truly functioned as a calorie engine. So let's break down this slide a little bit. I don't know if any of you have been hunting. I have, and it's a lot. And that's in today's society. It's early mornings, it's cold. You're walking long because game is up high or down low, but to get to it, usually you have to walk far. Especially, let's say, before the domestication of the horse, or not domestication, but when they brought the horses over, Spain contact. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is it took a lot of calories. You burnt a lot of calories hunting. So, nuts or grasshoppers or insects, different plants you could eat were crucial for this lifestyle. But with that said, you also had to have the ecological intelligence to know what trees were ready to harvest and what trees were going to be ready to harvest in coming up months or years even. Email time. Okay. Anyways, let's get more into that with this slide. So material culture reflects adaptation to mobility. Basketry was highly developed and often preferred over pottery. Why, Lauren? Well, I'm going to tell you. Baskets are lightweight, portable, and multifunctional. They could be used for gathering, winnowing, storing. Pottery is heavier and less compatible with season availability. Let's say you collected a lot of piñon over this last season. Now you're moving. Oh my gosh, your little child insists on carrying the piñon nut in the pottery. Then your child breaks the pottery. Everyone's hungry because of that poor little child. Annoying little child. Anyways, the child's probably not carrying the. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is pottery is not reliable. You drop it, you lose everything. So we're relying on baskets. Now let's get into dietary breadth. So dietary breadth was wide, including seeds, roots, nuts, fish, small mammals, and larger game when available. So you're not going to go all the way to Tucumcari to go hunt game because calorie to, you know, you're not getting all those calories back that you're spending on to get that game. If you take hunting and gathering with Dr. Asher, I think it's offered in full, but he'll go over this in depth, and all these archaeologists have made like math equations on it too, which I never understood, but all right, so religion was embedded in survival. The round dance reinforced social unity. Shamanism involved spiritual specialists who access power through dreams and visions, guiding healing and substance success. The earth was not viewed as an object, but rather as a relational system, right? So you give and you get, if that makes sense. All right. So now we're going to go over two case studies. So Owens Valley and the Chemehuevi. I don't know if I pronounced that right, so apologies if I didn't. So we're going to compare these two different adaptive systems within the Great Basins. Both lived in the same border region, but their environments were different enough that they developed different, distinct resilience strategies. So Owens Valley benefited from a relatively stable snowmelt flowing from the Sierra Nevada mountains, and this meant that water was more predictable, or water access was more predictable. And this allowed for longer term settlement. And so you can see this piece of land right here, Sierra Nevada's water access. So this shows that environment shapes strategy. Just like today, people living in coastal cities prefer differently than people living in desert regions, prepare differently than people living in desert regions. Resilience is always local, and it reflects the conditions people are responding to. So a little bit more about Owens Valley. Owens Valley sits along the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada, where mountain snow melt created relatively dependable water sources. Because of this stability, communities could remain in certain areas longer and invest labor directly into the landscape. Archaeological evidence shows irrigation ditches used to redirect water towards naturally occurring seed plants. This is important because it demonstrates intentional environment management. They were not simply gathering what happened to grow, they were shaping the ecosystem in sustainable ways. Owens Valley resilience involved investment in place. Instead of relying primarily on mobility, communities here engineered landscapes to increase food security. It shows flexibility within the broader Great Basin pattern. So let's talk a little bit more about irrigation. When we use the term incipient agriculture, we are referring to early stage plant management that stops short of full domesticated farming. So we're not talking about like plowing fields, but we're talking about adapting these streams to be able to flood. Never mind. Just going to keep to my script because I get off tasks. In Owens Valley, irrigation channels were used to increase the productivity of wild grasses and seed-bearing plants. This represents a middle ground between pure foraging and intensive agriculture. It challenges the outdated idea that societies move in a straight line from hunter-gatherer to farmer. Instead, it shows strategic adaptation. Why completely shift to large-scale agriculture if managed wild resources already provide sustainability? In modern terms, this resembles contemporary sustainable food systems that blend cultivation, conservation, and wild harvesting rather than industrial monocropping. So we're not seeing full agriculture here, but we're seeing instead of a lot of mobility, you're staying in one spot longer because you can rely on this water source for longer periods than other ecosystems. But what if you can't rely on water sources? Well, this next case study kind of goes over that. So, shifting fully to the Chimava, their lifeways were shaped by desert river systems, especially near the Colorado River. In arid environments, rivers functions as lifelines. They provide fish, plant life, and travel corridors. What are travel corridors? It's like the plants right next to a river. But desert rivers fluctuate dramatically. Flood and drought cycles make heavy permanent infrastructure risky. Instead of investing in the irrigation systems like those in the Owen Valley, the Chimava invested in mobility and ecological knowledge. They understood mesquite harvesting cycles, fish migration timing, and long-distance desert navigation routes. If Owens Valley represents investment in place, the Chimava represent investment in movement. Both systems are resilient, but they respond different environmental realities. And you can also see how these different lifestyles created a social, uh, created different realities for social life. So, warfare, it wasn't peaceful. They had to get resources in a different way. So, you're going to see raids, you're going to see club warfare. But what about the religious ways? So, for the Chimava, knowledge systems were central to survival. They developed oral maps embedded in song cycles. Song cycles were long narrative songs that described landscapes in sequence. By singing them, travelers could mentally trace routes across vast desert territories. This functioned almost like a memorized geographic system. Dreaming traditions were also significant. Dreaming was understood as a source of spiritual power and guidance. Knowledge about hunting territories and land rights were embedded culturally rather than written down. This reminds us that infrastructure is not always physical. For the Chimava, knowledge itself was infrastructure. The Great Disruption. So this slide marks a major turning point. In the 19th century, Euro-American settlers introduced ranching operations in the Great Basin. Ranching involved large-scale cattle and sheep grazing. Ranchers fenced land, claimed private property, and diverted water sources. In a region where water determined survival, fencing off springs and river access was devastating. Overgrazing reduced native plant growth, which disrupted established food systems. Mobility routes were cut off by property boundaries. Many indigenous people were pushed into wage labor, working for ranchers instead of sustaining themselves through traditional subsistence system. This created economic dependence and reduced autonomy. Resilience did not disappear, but it became constrained by external political and economic forces. This movement shows that resilience, or not movement, this moment, excuse me, shows that resilience depends on land access and sovereignty. So depending on the land, well, now people own this land. And this just kind of went against everything for generations that these indigenous populations lived off of. They lived off the land. And now people own the land. So it's just a different concept, and they can't practice traditional substance. So this slide marks, one powerful voice during this period was Sarah Winnemucca. She was a Northern Paiute writer, educator, and activist who publicly criticized federal Indian policy and mistreatment of Native communities. She lectured across the United States and published accounts describing injustices to her people faced. Her advocacy demonstrates that resilience is not only ecological or economic, it is also political and rhetorical. She used storytelling as a form of resistance. Her work reminds us that resilience includes the preservation of voice and narrative. The Ghost Dance movement. The Ghost Dance movement emerged in the late 1800s during a period of extreme hardship and dispossession. It was spiritual revitalization, a movement that promised renewal of the world, restoration of land, and reunion with ancestors. For many indigenous communities, it offered hope in the face of violence, land loss, and forced assimilation. While spiritual in nature, it was also deeply political. It represented a collective vision of cultural survival and renewal. Resilience sometimes takes form of spiritual revival when material systems are destabilized. To conclude, in looking at the Great Basin, we see that resilience has never meant simply surviving harsh conditions. It has meant developing flexible systems rooted in environmental knowledge, mobility, land management, and strong social networks. In Owens Valley, resilience took the form of irrigation and long-term investment in place. Among the Chemehuevi, resilience was expressed through mobility, oral mapping, and deep ecological literacy shaped by the desert river environment. These adaptive systems were later disrupted by ranching expansion, land seizure, and growing economic dependence on wage labor. Yet cultural knowledge endured, resistance movements emerged, political advocacy took shape. Resilience in the Great Basin is not a single strategy or movement in time. It is evolving process shaped by environment, history, and sovereignty. Ultimately, it reflects the enduring relationship between land, knowledge, and community across generations. So I want all of you guys to take a moment, go get some water, take a break, and then watch the videos that Dr. Stanley put in the module for this week, and it'll help break down each point. Um, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I hope you have a great week. Thanks.